everybody, my name is Sniper's Fun, and I welcome all of you back to the F-Zero 25th Anniversary Retrospective Series. We have talked about the original F-Zero. We have talked about the BS F-Zero Grand Prix games. Where we go next? It's obvious. We're going to be going to the N64 installment of the series, F-Zero X.
Too bad! You lost your machine!
F-Zero X was originally released in Japan on the Nintendo 64 on July 4th, 1998. It was released that same year in North America later on October 26th, and a month later in Europe on November 6th. The F-Zero X was the first game in the F-Zero series to introduce full-on actual 3D graphics, since the Nintendo 64 was capable of using 3D graphics. So we went from a pseudo 3D style game with Mode 7 on the Super Nintendo Super Famicom to a full-blown 3D game, F-Zero X, on the Nintendo 64. There were more racers in F-Zero X. We had only 4 in the original game, but F-Zero X introduced 26 new racers for a total of 30 playable racers that players could play as and pick from. And unlike the original game, F-Zero X allowed gamers to be able to adjust their performance of their vehicles, the acceleration and the top speed, the grip, the boost and durability, size and weight, based off what vehicle they picked, what character they picked, and which categories they adjusted. They could adjust a racer based off who they picked and how they adjust it. That will go along with their playing style. Do they want more speed? Do they want more acceleration? Do they want more weight? Do they want more grip or durability? It all comes down. Unlike the first game, gamers were allowed to choose how they wanted to race. One of the biggest new inclusions with F-Zero X was the inclusion of the Death Race, a race where 30 racers go one single racetrack, round and round again. It's not to get first place. The Death Race is a race where you have to, in fact, survive the entire race. You have to be the last one surviving, the last one standing, so you continue this race over and over and over again until you knock all the other racers out. They fall off the track, they blow up, whatever. There were also, in fact, more modes with F-Zero X. There was the Grand Prix mode, which is in practice mode, just like the original F-Zero. We also had the introduction of the time attack, which essentially is kind of like practice, except you're battling against times. The original F-Zero only had a few racers during the racetrack. Like I mentioned with the Death Race, F-Zero X is 30 racers each race. You and 29 other racers. The cups now in this game, the original game was Knight, Queen, and King for the Grand Prix mode. The Grand Prix mode in F-Zero X is Jack, Queen, and King, Jack replacing Knight. There's also, once you beat those cups, you get the Joker Cup and the X Cup. The X Cup is essentially a random track maker type cup where you basically play random tracks every time you jump into the cup. There's also different difficulties, just like the original F-Zero: Novice, Standard, Expert, and Master. The difficulty in the races are based off the cups you go. There will be easier racetracks in Jack than when you get to like King or Joker. The difficulty level, and this applies to the original too, especially since I didn't mention in the first video, basically determine how hard the other racers are, how hard the computers are. So basically, higher cups, harder racetracks. The higher difficulties, the harder the racers you go against. In the F-Zero X, you were able to save ghost data, essentially being able to battle your ghost data and master your time. It's basically this reason kind of what time attack kind of goes for. And unlike the original game, F-Zero X introduced 4-player multiplayer. You were able to play with your friends and your family, 4-player split screen through every different race track, and you all get to customize your vehicle, pick who you want to be, have fun listening to the music, and all that jazz. Now, F-Zero X did receive some fairly critical reception. The critical reception was positive, but it was kind of criticized for the lack of graphical detail. The vehicles since it was an early, since the N64 was kind of like an early 3D system, it didn't have the total graphical detail that you would see in later generations, later systems. The vehicles kind of looked like 3D models that had the color and some detail to them, but they weren't fully detailed, and F-Zero X was partially criticized for it. As for sales-wise, F-Zero X in North America and Europe sold about a little over 380,000 copies, while in Japan it sold a little over 97,000 copies. You see, was a bit of a downgrade in sales from the original F-Zero, which worldwide sold a little over 1 million copies, to how much worldwide this game sold. So there was some distinction between maybe it being a launch title for the original Super Nintendo compared to this being released later on, or maybe the people didn't. Maybe it was a lot harder, which in fact F-Zero X was a lot harder than the original, and so on and so forth. So it did sell well still. It did sell well enough still to make a profit. It just didn't sell as well as the original. Now, before I get on to talking about my thoughts about the game, there's one little thing I didn't mention for this game, and that's the F-Zero X disk drive game, the DD version, which was, the disk drive was basically an enhancement, an attachment for the N64 in Japan, which was used for a few N64 games. Unfortunately, since that never made outside of Japan, F-Zero X and other various games that used it too never made outside as well. And basically one of the major inclusions with the disk drive version of the game, the enhancement to that game, was that you were able to create your own racetracks. That's the major inclusion that I remember seeing that included that. But it was not a totally different game. It was an enhancement, an attachment to the game that added more content in. Now, basically, I'm going to give my thoughts on F-Zero X. Now, I'm going to be quite frank here. I still love F-Zero X, but I could say this much. I did not play it as much as the original. I played the original a ton when I was a kid, a ton when I was younger. F-Zero X I played a ton too, but I didn't play it as much as the original. That's not to say it's a bad game. That's not to say it's not good. A lot of people love F-Zero X. A lot of people adore F-Zero X. It's probably one of the top favorites in the entire series. I'm just saying that for me personally, I didn't play it as much as the original, but I did still play it quite a bit for an N64 game, around the time. I loved it. I loved the music. The F-Zero X really took a metal approach to music. The music was a lot more hardcore, a lot more thrash, metal music. It sounded really good. It was you seen all your classic themes and new from the original Super Nintendo, Super Famicom game, and the new music and new stages. I thought the graphical style looked pretty good. The inclusion of multiplayer is a plus for the game. It's pretty freaking awesome to have a racing game to play with friends and family. And I thought all the new inclusions, this was the first game that really included a lot of features. The original game was pretty bare bones. It's awesome? Yes, it was, but it was pretty bare bones, and that's because it was a test for Mode 7. This was a full-blown new game sequel. They added Death Race, Time Attack, ton of new racers, ton of new racetracks, ton of new content, and with the disk drive thing, you were able to create tracks, which sadly we never were able to do, and hopefully in the future we're able to do that, but we weren't able to do it for there. And that's really about it. That's basically my general thoughts on F-Zero X on the Nintendo 64. I liked it, not as much as the original, but it was still a really good game. Stay tuned for the next F-Zero 25th Anniversary Retrospective Series episode when we talk about the first handheld game in the series, F-Zero Maximum Velocity on the Game Boy Advance. My name is Simon Fun. Please subscribe if you want to. Stay tuned for the next episode, and have a lovely day.